The chess world just witnessed something incredible. It's June 17th, 2025, and what started as a normal Tuesday quickly turned into a day for the history books. In the early title Tuesday, Magnus Carlsen showed up, cool as ever, and crushed the field and took the first place. Classic Magnus. But the late event, that's where things got spicy. Hans Niemann showed up like a man on a mission, and not on any mission. We are talking speedrunning bosses here. To win the late title Tuesday, Hans took down Hikaru Nakamura, Caruana Fabiano, and one and only Alireza Firouzja, all in the final match. 3 giants, 3 games, but 1 champion. In this video, I'm breaking down those final 3 games, move by move, as Hans took on the best in the world and came out on top. This wasn't just a tournament, it was a statement. So let's dive in. So starting with the round number 9, Hans Niemann faced Hikaru Nakamura. Both the players are having an enormous rating of more than 3,250. So Hans is playing with white. He opened the game with 1 e4. We have e5 by Nakamura. We have the Italian, and now we have the move knight f6. Usually black also goes for playing the move bishop c5. We have knight f6, and the question is to see, will Niemann will go for knight g5? No, he didn't, and he played the move d3. Protecting the center pawn, bishop e7, knight c3, d6. Both the sides are just okay, and here black decided to took the knight on f3, not going back on h5, maybe because of g4, which is the best move actually in this position. Bishop g6, bishop e3, and basically white is having a bit more space on the king side, as white has not really castled up yet on the king side. So maybe after bishop e3, queen d2, white is preparing to do a long castle and launch a fury of attacks on the king side by pushing his pawns down the road. Instead, at the place of bishop h5, Nakamura decided to capture the knight on f3, queen f3, knight to e4, knight to d4, attacking the queen and the pawn, so the queen has to go back. That's the only way to play. c6, maybe threatening b5 and the d5 at the same time. Bishop to a2, knight goes to e6, castle up finally, castle, rook e1. Both the sides are playing extremely normal chess, nothing fun is happening for now, at least. Queen c7, bishop e3, rook to d8, and now queen f3. For sure, you cannot really go for capturing the pawn on a7. It's not a free pawn. b6, and you lose the bishop. So queen f3, trying to get the pieces on the king side. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe knight e2, knight g3, knight f5 can be an idea. a5, knight e2, and that's exactly what happened. d5, striking in the center, and that's the best time to strike in the center, as black has developed all his pieces. Knight to g3, not taking the pawn, but just flowing up with my plan. g6, taking control of the f5 square. Bishop h6, if you push a pawn, you make weaknesses. So bishop h6, rook e8, c3. Hans is also not allowing Nakamura to grab a complete center control, and maybe he's preparing of g4 himself. Who knows? a4, grabbing maximum space on the queen side, locking up 2 pawns on the queen side. Rook to d1, and after rook g1, Hans has also successfully completed all his development. d4, bishop took the knight on e6, fe6, and now this move has both his pros and cons. First of all, black is having double pawns on the e5, which is definitely a good thing for white. And second, the good thing for black here is black is having the open f file, but currently in this position, f8 square is controlled by the white dark square bishop. So maybe black should try to trade off the dark square bishop. Okay, takes, rook cross d4, and now white is also having a weakness on the d3 pawn. Knight to e2, the rook goes back, and now we have the move d4. So white is basically allowing black. So white is allowing black to remove his double e pawns. And now rook to d8. And this is the thing which beginners don't really sense. They are like, okay, black is having a weakness, so white to remove the weakness. But if you don't remove the weakness, how are you going to remove your weakness? So d4, rook d8, And now bishop to g5, attacking the double knight. King g7, the bishop goes back on e3, which was not the best way to play the position. The best way would have been to play the move g3, b4, making some slow moves in the position. Bishop e3 was a backward move. c5, and a very strong move by Nakamura. c5, maybe c5 was the move that was missed by Hans Niemann. You can't really capture the pawn because you lose the rook. So Nakamura is just building pressure on the d4 pawn. So now we have d5. Takes, and rook d5. Black is just a pawn up. Okay, knight c3. Rook d1, rook d1, rook d1. Queen d1. Queen to c6. And now we have queen f4. Okay. Yeah. And now, material-wise, the position is even. It should be a draw. c4, it's a good move. You're trying to not allowing white to push his pawns on the queen side. Knight to b6. And now we have c3. Takes. Okay, the bishop goes back. And now white is the one, a pawn up. And actually, okay, you are just losing a pawn. And now black is a pawn down. White is a pawn up. Black needs to do something. White is slowly getting his pieces, getting his king, and now white has already decided to push his pawns on the king side. We have a trade. Okay, centralizing the knight. Okay. And now we have f5. A very strong move in the position. Take, and you do not take because it would be a draw. Instead, we have a check. A very strong intermediate move by Hans Niemann. And the king is forced to go back. And now white is going to recapture the pawn. And now the big blunder in the position, which was b5 by Nakamura. The only way to keep the position equal was knight b3, attacking the bishop. And basically black wants to capture the bishop. That's the idea. So if the bishop goes back and now just knight c5 check, the king have to move somewhere. And now b5 makes sense because black is having just knight d7 on the right time to stop this pawn from becoming a queen. But b5 was a blunder because it allows white to play the move c5. And now you can't really trade off the bishops because you can't really stop the queen. So going back, Nakamura went back with the bishop, but now knight attacks the bishop, pushes the pawn, and now knight to b7, knight to g7. You have to stop it. So king e7 the only way. Check. You gave up the pawn for the piece, and now it's just winning. It's just winning now. It's all about technique, and we know that Hans is a good player. And yeah, the bishop goes now. She's just trying to slowly make progress, though it's still not for kids. Yeah, this endgame, and you now must know how to mate with the bishop and the knight. That's the main thing. And okay, now we are going to get a masterclass by Hans Niemann how to mate with the bishop and the knight. Okay, so he's just trying to the first idea is to just kick the king in the corner, and that's exactly what happened. And now the main idea is to form a W. That's it. Yep. Check. The knight goes back, and now yeah, that's exactly what happens. The bishop now it's a perfect position. We are just getting a W, and that's mate. The king tries to run away. And now knight to e7, a very typical idea. If king f6, bishop goes to over here, just creating a imaginary wall. So that's exactly what happened though. And eventually, after a couple of moves, on the move number 110, Hikaru Nakamura decided to resign the game. King over here, that's a mate. If the king goes over here, king f6, king h7, king f7, king over here, king g6, king over here, knight h6. And that's eventually a mate. So this was the round number 9 between Hans Niemann versus Hikaru Nakamura. A very interesting game, but Hans Niemann, in the end of the day, came out to be the champion. So now let's move on to the game between Hans Niemann versus Caruana Fabiano from the round number 10. Okay, so we have the game between Hans Niemann versus Caruana Fabiano. Caruana is playing with the white pieces. Hans is playing with the black pieces. From the 10th round, we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. We are having the 4 knights game. Already a draw maybe. h3, bishop to b4, bishop to d3 by Fabi. It looks like for beginners, it looks like a bad move. Why why is bishop being on d3? Like there is a pawn on e4, there is a pawn on c2, you're stopping your own pawn on d3, but this is an opening. This is an opening. Short castle, rook e8, rook e1, a6, knight goes to d5. Knight goes to d5. Attacking the knight, attacking the bishop. And the typical idea in this position is to play the move c3, pulling the bishop back and striking in the center with d4. So we have bishop c5. Of course, if you try to take off the knight over here, you have to move the knight and you lose the pawn on the e5. So you can't really do so. So you have to. So black simply went back with the bishop, keeping the bishop pair. c3, d6, bishop c2. The same idea as I said, you guys. h6. Okay, d4 striking in the center. The bishop goes back. We have a trade of pair of knights. Bishop goes to e3. Knight goes to e7, and with the same idea, with the technical idea, knight g6, knight f4, and blah blah blah, knight g6, queen d2, bishop e6. Both the sides are just simply developing the pieces and also trading the pieces at the same time. We have a trade of the bishops, rook e7, rook e3, rook e8, rook e1, and it already looks like a draw. It looks like a draw. Yeah, just okay. White is obviously having great center control, but both the sides are not really having any minor pieces. So maybe it's a draw. Okay, both the sides decide to repeat the positions and we have a draw. We have a draw in only 30 moves. That's it. So yeah, so it's a draw in the round number 10 between Hans Niemann versus Caruana Fabiano. And now we are only having one round to go. It's between Alireza Firouzja, one and only, versus Hans Niemann. So let's check it out what happened in that game, because this game was boring. So now coming to the final game of the late title Tuesday 2025, 17 June, blah blah blah. Alireza is playing with white. Hans Niemann having a bad luck, playing with the black pieces once again. Alireza started with knight to f3, d5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, e6. As we know, Alireza Firouzja is a very aggressive player, so we are definitely going to enjoy this game. This is like a pure desert. Bishop e7, d3. We are having a King's Indian attack structure by white, putting the pawn on d3, knight on d2, knight to c6, e4, takes, and e5. Okay, knight c3. The typical idea of taking away the d4 and the b4 square from the knight on c6, bishop goes to e6, queen goes to e2, and already like in my human eyes, it looks like a good position for white already, because the c pawn is a backward pawn. Like usually the c pawn is on c6 or maybe on c5. Generally on c6, doing the same thing as the pawn on c3 is doing, and now black is also allowing white to play the move knight g5, which doesn't really make any sense. So knight d7 and now knight c4. Okay, so basically if knight g5 can't really be played because the e7 bishop is protecting the square. So knight c4 and now h6, rook to d1, queen goes to e8, the knight goes back with the typical idea of putting the knight on d5 or maybe on f5. Knight goes over here. Both the sides are just okay. You see the backside of the pawn being on c7. White can easily put pressure on that pawn. And obviously, you don't really love to take over here because you lose a piece. And if you take with the bishop, it's still the same case. You lose the pawn in the center. And it's eventually already winning for white. So rook c8. And it already looks like a passive position to play with the black pieces. But I would already love to play with the white pieces. And so the same as the engine. So bishop e3. And now we have knight to d7. And now b4. Alireza being Alireza, just expanding on the queen side. b6, a4, takes. And now knight to b8. Already you see, out of the opening, Hans Niemann played a very bad opening. He's having a passive position. Alireza Firouzja as being the aggressive one, just pulling all his gear. Okay, and now we have f5. We are going to see some game. f5. Maybe some pushes on the king on the center. We have a take, and now we have the move bishop to d2. Okay, what's the idea of bishop d2? I don't know. Bishop to d6, and now finally Hans Niemann is like, okay, now let me just improve my pieces position. And now we have c4, queen goes to h5, bishop goes back, the knight goes to f6, and we have a queen trade. And currently the pawn is hanging, so we have knight onto e4 attacking the bishop and also protecting the f5 pawn with the rook. The bishop goes back and we have a knight sacrifice. And actually many of you guys must be thinking, okay, bishop goes to g4 attacking the rook. But guys, after rook c f8, and this position is already better for black because black is having two minor pieces for the rook. So that's not the idea. The idea is to play the move bishop d3, which is a very strong move available in the position. And the point here is the knight can't really go any of these two squares to protect the rook. And the rook can't really move to protect the knight. So basically, we have this position where the material is even, but white is having the bishop pair advantage, having a bit more space on the queen side. Black is having an isolated pawn. White is having the open a file. So practically speaking up, white is having a better position. Rook goes to f6, bishop goes to e2, knight goes to d7. Okay, so white is just putting pressure on the pawn on e5, on the isolated pawn, which should be the idea. Yep, getting one more attacker. And finally using the a file of the rook by putting pressure on the c7 pawn. And now the idea could be to push the pawn to c5, sacrificing the pawn and capturing the pawn on c7 using g pawn as a pass pawn. Rook f7, bishop goes to e6, and definitely this position looks good for white. I'm kind of surprised how Hans Niemann was able to win this position. Rook f8, bishop goes to e4, h5, generating counterplay on the king side. Rook goes to f7, okay. So currently the pawn is hanging, and now this is actually the best move because if white tries to capture the pawn over here, you are losing your own pawn on f2. So we have rook e2, and now we have g4. Okay, the rook goes back, and now we have h4. The bishop goes back, and now already, maybe if you took, now knight f4 check, and you have to take, and now maybe ef4, and maybe black is generating some heavy counterplay in this position. Even rook cross f4 is possible. So yeah. So the bishop went back, and actually after h3 check, which is practically I believe is a good move because the pawn is only two squares away from being a queen. The knight goes back. The knight. Okay, now the idea was to play the move knight to d4, so white have to give up the bishop. And now it looks more of a drawish position. And now we have rook e4. I believe c5 would have been the best way. Sorry about that. Take, and take. And this would have been a draw. Instead, rook e4, which was a bit slow move, and Hans Niemann actually sacrificed the rook for the pawn and the bishop. Check, and he took the another pawn. So basically, he sacrificed the rook for the bishop and two pawns, and now he's having two pawns on the third and the fourth rank, which is practically good for black. Takes. And the question is to see in which world Hans Niemann was able to win this position. Okay, maybe this was the pawn. Okay. Oh my god. Okay, rook h4 was the big blunder in this position. King g2 is a draw. If black pushes, just rook e8 check. If the king goes over here, king f3. And that's the draw. Basically, this happens and that's the draw. Instead, like if you give rook to e8 check, that's a blunder because now we have king f3. And now black can push the pawn. So that's why king g2. But rook h4 was a big blunder. Because after king d3, there is no way white can stop this pawn. Like the rook can't really go on e4. So if king g2, just push. And you can't really stop the queen. If the rook goes back, just push. Rook goes over here and I'll just use the bishop and make a queen. That's it. The game is over. That's it. So basically both the players were under extreme time pressure, time scramble. 1 second left for Alireza Firouzja, so he just played rook h4 and he just lost the game. So with this game, Hans Niemann scored 10 points out of 11, and like by drawing two games against Caruana and Caruana Fabiano from the 10th round, and Yeah, he's the late Title Tuesday champion. And what's fascinating thing about this Title Tuesday here is Magnus Carlsen became the champion of the early Title Tuesday by getting 10.5 points out of 11 by winning 10 games in a row and drawing the last game. And in the late Title Tuesday, Hans Niemann came, man on a mission, and he just won. That's it. Beating Hikaru Nakamura, beating Alireza Firouzja, and drawing with Caruana Fabiano. That's it. So that's it for this video. I hope that you guys must have enjoyed the analysis. If you did, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'm going to see you soon. So thank you for watching, and bye-bye.